And hello, and welcome to another episode of Torn Book Club. I am your host, Saruman, aka Josh, and this is November 1st, 2015. And I am kind of recovering still from a pretty crazy Halloween last night. Happy Halloween to everybody. Day after. Um, yeah, last night I went to the Hollywood Bowl to see Danny Elfman and the Hollywood Bowl Orchestra perform The Nightmare Before Christmas live. And then, uh, after that, they brought out a lot of the original cast members, did some encores with the original cast members, um, yeah, it ended with a performance that I think is actually trending right now on the internet. Danny Elfman got together with some old members of Oingo Boingo and performed Dead Man's Party for the first time in 20 years. And I kind of lost my mind. So it was a pretty epic Halloween. Um, so that I hope everybody else had a very good Halloween. Uh, I saw somebody in the chat said something about watching a Disney miniseries. Aravandi was talking about that. Uh, I see we got a lot of people uh, in the chat right now. We got Aravandi, I Stole the One Ring, Temple, and Amy, who has been on. She was on the show for a couple episodes. Most recently, the Princess Bride episode. So hello, Amy. And anonymous 7547, you are testing. I can see you. Okay. So, as we uh, wind down our horror month, this week we will be discussing our October book of the month, which was 14 by Peter Clines. And I chose this one because it was somewhat horror-ish, but not so graphic or so horrific that it would turn a lot of people off. This is more of a supernatural mystery. And I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed the characters in it. The setup was very intriguing. Um, and oh, it looks like that anonymous was Marfles. Hello, Marfles. Good to see you. Uh, so let's just get right into it. So the story of 14 centers around a guy named, oh God, Nick. I believe his name is Nick. I'm really bad with character names, and so I'm pretty sure his name is Nick. Let me look it up real quick. Talk amongst yourselves. But yeah, I'm pretty sure his name is Nick. Anywho, yeah, so it centers around this main character, Nate. Sorry, his name is Nate. Uh, Nate is Nate is a guy who lives in L.A. Not really having too great a life. He's working for a magazine in data entry as a temp, but like one of those temps that they just sort of keep on indefinitely. Um, and he doesn't have a whole lot of money, and he is looking for a new place. And this guy at a party recommends that he check out this one building that has incredibly good rent. And He goes to check it out, likes it, can't beat it for the price. So he moves into this new building and slowly begins to uncover some mystery hiding behind the walls in this old building. And he starts to meet all of his neighbors, some of whom are more aware of the strange goings on in the building than others. Some have put together various investigations themselves, but it's when Nate comes in that they really begin to supercharge their investigation of the building. Uh, so we got some of the other characters. I'm going to have to look this up. As you can tell, it's been a little while since I last read it, so I'm character names are always the worst for me. Uh, but I did read it. I swear to you, I did read it. So so yeah, uh, he meets an exhibitionist artist type girl named Zila, who is who she's a she's got an interesting backstory, mostly like raised with a silver spoon in her mouth, was sort of forced into going into med school, didn't want to do it, so she left her family and moved into this building to become an artist. There's also Veek, who is um, a white hat hacker. Uh, and she's the one who has been really sort of working on investigating the building for a while, but hasn't really gotten her neighbors together to do it. But when Nate comes in and starts finding all this stuff out, um, he he joins forces with her because she has all this research on the building that she's done, and they begin to start to put things together. So some of the things that are going on in this building is one, um, there's one room that is never rented out. They say because anybody who has ever rented that room uh, ultimately ends up killing themselves. Uh, there's another room that for some reason takes up 2 stories instead of just one. Um, Veek's room is always set at 69 degrees. Uh, it never alters from that, regardless of what the temperature is outside. Um, and then Nate's room has some very weird stuff going on in there. He has one light fixture that will will turn any light bulb that you put into it into a black light. And excuse me. And he's also starting to notice these weird bright green cockroaches wandering around the building. And Temple saying, of course, always a weird room where people end up killing themselves. Yeah, there's a specific reason for that, but we'll get into that later. Um, and then another thing that they notice is that there's this one room, number 14, that has a whole bunch of padlocks on it, some that seem to be really old, and nobody ever goes in there, nobody ever comes out. This room is just always locked. And so every room has its own weird quirk to it. And they also have their superintendent, Oscar, who always tries to dissuade them from looking too deep into the building. So like he clearly knows that there is something going on, or he's part of whatever is going on in this building. And as they begin to put things together, they start to uncover more things, like there are no power lines going to the building, and yet they always have power. Um, they realize that the representative from the property management company, this girl who uh, introduced Nate to the building and introduced everybody to the building. She is a paid actress um, who is basically just reading off of a script. She's not really any sort of real estate agent. She's actually just a college student who's looking for some extra money. Uh, what is Air saying? It's probably a room that locks you in and plays some annoying song all the time, 24/7, until you just can't stand it anymore. No, there's more to it. But, uh, what's Marple saying? The most depressing stuff I've read about rooms is To Room 19. I think it's a short story, not a book. I haven't heard of that one. I might have to check that one out. So, so there's all these weird things going on in the building, and they begin their investigation, as you would always, in the basement, where they have their laundry room. And the basement has these doors that are padlocked and chained, and it's supposed to be like a supply room. Oscar tells them never go in there, but eventually Nate, Zila, and Veek uh, manage to work their way in during a time when Oscar is away from the building. And what they discover is that there is a staircase down there that oh, and now they're talking about elevators. And yes, there is an elevator in this book, in this building, but it doesn't really go anywhere or do anything. The most interesting thing about the elevator is that the on the roof, the power station for the elevator, the one that's supposed to have all the cables and power and everything, is much larger than it should be. Marples is asking, seriously, what's with mystery rooms and elevators? I think it's just it's something that sort of captures the imagination. Uh, why can't something creepy happen at a McDonald's, for example? Creepy stuff always happens at McDonald's. Have you not been to one? uh, but what is it? so so they're investigating the basement, and the basement has this staircase that leads way, way, way deep down, and and Amy's talking about the Cecil Hotel, and I was gonna talk about the Cecil Hotel in a little bit because that is like a real life mystery building. Um, so uh, they go down. They go down the staircase and they discover that there is like some sort of work area, some old work area that's been abandoned for a very long time um, with old lockers and old logbooks and everything, and uh, and they're not sure what this all means, but they keep going and it goes into a kind of like a mine tunnel, and it keeps going further and further, deeper and deeper down until they finally reach what is essentially uh, a geothermal power plant. Uh, this is a power plant that is digging deep down into this big chasm in the earth, and that's what's powering the building. Then they also uh, then they also discover that this room that is 2 stories actually contains an old style control panel. Uh, if you There's like a little hole in the wall, like up in an area that you can only get to with a ladder, and if you twist it with an Allen wrench, it opens up this huge panel in the wall that has all these weird buttons and dials and knobs and switches and old vacuum tubes, like whatever this is, it's very old. And what they begin to put together is that there is something there's a purpose to the building that is more than just being an apartment building. Uh, so it's more than just an apartment building. There's something more to it. There's something else going on here, and but they're not really sure what it is. Oscar isn't telling them anything, um, but they want to keep investigating, and so um, what they um, and Nate sort of discovers this by accident when he accidentally peels a little paint off of his wall, is that there is writing underneath the paint in his apartment, and so he peels off all the paint and finds all of these weird equations, um, and first everybody's like, well, why does it have to be your room? And then Nate says, well, maybe it's in everybody's room. And so everybody else begins peeling the paint in their apartments, and sure enough, there are all these strange equations written on the walls, and none of them are really sure what it means. Nate also finds a message um, written in some weird ink that can only be seen with the black light, written on the wall in his kitchen. Um, and it's in like some old language. I want to say Armenian, but I don't remember for sure. And then also he finds a message, an old message scrawled in old blood on his wall that says "Save Kavach, save the world," or something like that. Protect Kavach, protect the world. Now Kavach is the name of the building. It's got a little name placard uh, on top of the entrance, and yeah, he's none of them are really sure what all of this means, putting it all together, or why people go into room 16 and suddenly feel like they need to kill themselves. Um, um, why 14 is completely locked, and why or why if you touch a wall next to room 14, it feels very cold, but it doesn't emanate cold. But if you touch the wall, it feels cold. Uh, all sorts of weird things going on here. And so Nate begins trying to dig up the history of the building. So he goes to uh, basically like the old government records, and he finds that the building is designated as an historical landmark. And so he tries to look up why it was designated an historical landmark, but there are no records of it. So he calls up somebody at the records department and asks about this specific building, and she's like, "Wait, there's no record? Well, this is weird. I'm gonna have to go digging around for this." And so he leaves her with that, and then about a week later, he calls back and discovers that she has been transferred. So not only was there something going on with the building, but there is something still going on with the building, and there's something going on that people don't want other people to know. There's some sort of weird cover up also going on with this. So, so um, they also begin to try to put together what all these different equations mean. And one of the things that they determine is some of the equations seem to be like some sort of population projection equation, where it's like sort of projecting like how big the population is going to get over time, and it kind of stops at around like 1.7 billion or something like that. which at this point, human population has way exceeded that. I think we're up to like what 6-7 billion now. uh, and so like there's all these different pieces coming in, and none of it really comes together. None of it really makes sense. And then finally, the craziest thing happens, and this is where we start to get into the spoiler part of the story, where everything starts to come together and into what I think is a very crazy kind of ending, but it's still a very cool one. Um, when they open up the panel, the control panel in this one room, one of the guys just casually like flips one of the switches because what the heck, and because like they looking at the control panel, they can also determine that whatever it is, it's on and it's doing something. And so one of the guys flips one of the switches, and almost immediately they begin to feel a kind of earthquake. And not only do they feel an earthquake, but they also see the sun go out. And and just as quickly they flip it back on, and everything goes back to normal. But there were no reports of earthquakes. Nobody outside of the building felt this earthquake. And Nate noticed when the sun was going out, um, there was something floating in front of it, some sort of creature. And so this only sort of deepens the mystery, because now like they're clearly in something that is doing something extraordinarily powerful. Because the old generator is still working, and it has been working, and it's generating more power than the building needs. And so they're going through. I can't remember exactly how they finally get some information on on the man who built the building. Um, but they finally do, and they're able to look him up in old periodicals, and find that it was originally built by a man who um, put together some very wacky theories back in the 1800s. One was that all his biggest one. Hang on a second. His biggest theory was that all humans project some sort of psychic resonance, or some sort of psychic frequency or harmonic. And what happens when, and it all sort of joins together, but at a certain point, when the human population reaches a specific point, that psychic projection, that psychic harmonic, will reach a specific kind of resonance that will actually shatter our reality and bring in a new one. And and he determined that that population projection, or that population number where that would happen, is around 1.7 billion. Now the big question is, of course, we've way exceeded that. Why hasn't our planet turned into a nightmarish hellscape? And what they determined was that this guy, when he learned about this, began putting together plans for something that could stave that off, or something that could sort of break up the harmonic, the psychic frequencies, so that this gateway wouldn't open. And that device, he went out. He went out to Los Angeles, which at the time was mostly orange groves and desert, um, and began to build his device. And he built it as a building so that it could be hidden. And what they also learn after a little while is that he did it with a couple other people, one of whom was Nikola Tesla. Um, they built this building, and this building has been basically working this entire time, keeping the Earth from being swallowed up by this hellscape alternate dimension. And so when the one guy flipped the switch, they got a little bit of a glimpse of what that was. And one of the other things that they figured out was another guy who worked on the building, his nephew was H.P. Lovecraft. And a lot of what Lovecraft wrote was actually based on the stories that his uncle would tell him about this alternate dimension. And so whatever this other nightmare world is, it's also kind of what you would see in an H.P. Lovecraft story. And eventually they learn that the man who built the building was eventually hunted down and killed by a doomsday cult. And what Nate also discovers is that there was a little pocket inside. And Eravandi is asking, was Cthulhu floating past the sun? Pretty much, which is why I didn't give you a description of what the creature was. But yes. Now it's not really technically Cthulhu per se, or like not specifically Cthulhu, but we'll get into that in a second. Because Nate also finds that hidden away in a little cubby underneath in the back of one of his closets is the dead body of the man who built the building, whose name I can't remember. And he actually was killed by this doomsday cult. And so finally, they're like, okay, we need to find out what the hell is in room 14. And this is where it gets really weird. Because they find a period of time where Oscar is actually leaving for like a week. And they're like, okay, this is the time when we're going to break into room 14 and find out what the hell is actually in there. And so they end up very, very meticulously picking all of the padlocks so that they can put them back on when they're done. They cut through all of the different layers of paint that have been painted over the seams. And finally open the door, and inside room 14 is outer space. That's the only way I can describe it. It is a portal to outer space with a giant sun off in the background, and immediately everything in the building begins getting sucked into it. They all begin to get sucked into it. And it's this very intense scene where they're all just like clamoring, trying to get back into the building, and close the door, and they're able to do it all except for one of the neighbors does get sucked in, and they lose her. And they eventually do close. They're able to close the door and get the padlocks back on. And Hervani's saying, I'm beginning to understand why they kept the door shut. Yes, kinda, don't you think? And so then, like, after... and Marfels is asking, what's the name of the book? The book is called 14. Here, let me bring it up real quick. It's called 14, and the author's name is Peter Clines. And so that's what's in room 14, a gateway to outer space. Yes, just the number, Marvels. Uh, like Temple saying, it seems entirely reasonable to keep a door to outer space shut. I mean, really, common sense, right? Yeah. Yeah, I mean, of course. Why would you not want to? If you've got a door to outer space, best to keep it shut. Uh, so, so first of all, like they're like, okay, there is a door to outer space in our building. Second question is, why is there a door to outer space in our building? And what they can, what they sort of determine is that um, this building, the Cabbage building, is sort of keeping this balance between our world and some other hell dimension. And so, in order to keep that balance, there needs to be a counterweight. And Room 14, which is taking the gravity of an entire sun, is that counterweight. So, there's a lot of power going into this building. Uh, and and I think that that is also why the people in room 16 always kill themselves. I believe that's the reason, is that like it's always so cold, it's always so dense in there that it just sort of weighs down heavily on you because 16 is like right next door to it. I think that's why. I'd have to look at, I'd have to reread it. Uh, I I last read this earlier this month. I didn't have a chance to reread it closer to today, so a lot of the details are still kind of fuzzy to me. Um, but after the room 14 incident, they're like, okay, we need to shut this room, lock it up. We're going to cover up the death of our neighbor so that Oscar never finds out. Um, and we're going to get rid of everything, all of our investigation, and we're just going to quietly go back to our lives and act like this never happened. Because whatever the building is doing, it's beyond us, and we should just let it keep doing whatever it's doing. Because clearly, whatever it's doing is keeping the world safe from Lovecraftian monsters. So, so they're like, okay, we'll just go back to our lives, and we'll never deal with this again. Of course, it doesn't end there, because the Doomsday cult that killed the building's uh, creator, they're still alive and well. And also, one of their members is living in the building and has been sort of an inside agent this whole time. And so he's been helping out with the investigation. And so when he learns everything there is to know about this building and learns how it works, then he brings in the cult and they attack everybody and break into the control room and begin turning everything off and shutting the building down to bring hell to Earth. And so as that happens, the building itself actually is transported from here in Los Angeles to a mirror location on another world, or some alternate world that has become just a complete desert. Um, it has very weird. It has a very weird sense of depth and horizon, and there are these creatures that fly around in the sky that look like giant whales with squid heads, then have giant wings, and they call them. They end up calling these creatures squid whales or squales for short, and these are the Lovecraftian monsters that they've been hearing about, and now they're trapped on this world with it. And also Oscar goes with them and realizes what has happened, and he said, and in wonderful horror movie fashion, he says, "It's okay. I know what we can do. I know how we can fix this." and he's just about to tell everybody when one of the squales comes in and grabs him. and and so a couple people in the group, another character who I forgot to mention is named Ted. I believe his name is Ted, and he's this guy who is like he says, if someone said squale, I would think it was a squirrel whale, not a squid whale. That's fair. That's a fair assessment. So Ted is this guy who um, he's a new guy in the building. He's actually newer than Nate, um, and he's a retired book publisher who would publish a lot of instructional books and textbooks and that sort of stuff. And he always seems to have a very uncanny knowledge of things. And they soon realize that it's not because the whole publishing thing is actually a cover, and he is actually some sort of retired military agent who really knows his stuff. And they go out into they go out into the desert to try to find Oscar. And in doing so, they find this very weird kind of city place that has people there, but they're all slaves. And they're slave masters who are like these sort of weird, almost cockroach-like people. And it's Nate and Ted, Zila, and oh no, Zila's back in the building. Veek is with them, and one other guy, I think. Because since Oscar is gone, Zila begins to try to figure out what the Doomsday Cult did to the console by checking out which buttons and knobs have been disturbed, because there's a lot of dust buildup on them. So she can sort of determine what was moved just by the fact that the dust on them has been displaced. So she begins jotting all of that stuff down, and hopefully being able to use all of that so that they can reset everything and get the machine working again. And so while Nate, Ted, and Veek and another guy are out trying to find Oscar, she's doing this, and they also, while they're out, they find Oscar has been cut in half and has basically been laid out as a sacrifice to the squid whales. So they quickly rush back to the building. Meanwhile, the squid whales are starting to close in closer to the building because they realize that with the building here, the gateway to our world has been opened. And the squid whales are so they have such strong psychic energy that just by flying over them, like, everybody can hear their thoughts so powerfully that it actually like causes them physical pain. Like they're writhing, they begin bleeding from the eyes and the nose and the ears. Temple saying, I love how preposterous this story is. It really is. It's like it goes like you have this really cool supernatural mystery that suddenly takes this this turn into complete insanity, and it's amazing. And so Zila is able to start putting all the different switches back to where they were, and then they also but then, like, as the squid whales are closing in, more and more things are going wrong. Like, some of the vacuum tubes have been shattered, so they have to rush down to the basement to try to find replacements, get the replacements in there. They finish everything, and it's still not working. And then they realize that one of the switches had already been switched before, which was the one that the one guy switched that accidentally turned off the sun. and she accidentally counted it in one of the switches that needed to be turned, so they had to turn it back. And then when they did that, finally, the building goes back to how it was, and the squid whales um, are consigned back to their hell dimension. And then after that, um, they begin to sit back and sort of take stock of everything and try to go back to their lives. But it ends with Nate getting a visit by a mysterious government man who offers him Oscar's old position as superintendent of the building. And he's going to get a good government stipend, he's going to be in charge of the building, and he gets to have his own staff of anybody he wants, so he can hire all of his neighbors to work with him. And the government man tells him, we're hoping that by bringing you into this, all of your investigations and everything that you've done can help us determine what exactly is going on with this building, because even we in the government don't totally understand this building. All we know is that it works and that it has to work. And so it ends with Nate and Veek, who have gotten together romantically. Eravandi saying, I'm surprised the government man isn't the Men in Black come to erase their memories. And, you know, it could have gone that way too, but I think it was probably smarter on their part to be like, okay, you know this, okay, we're going to make you part of the team that works with it, because you clearly are skilled and know what you're doing. And so it ends with Nate and Veek basically taking up a new role as building superintendents. And Temple saying, a commercial started with me saying this, and she was hoping I wasn't saying it was a true story because it's just too crazy at the end. No, it's not a true story. But here's the cool thing. The writer, Peter Clines, he puts a lot of geographical locations into the book, and he identifies a nearby intersection. So, just out of curiosity, I looked up that intersection on Google Maps and went to Street View, went up the street a little bit, and wouldn't you know it, right up the street is a building that almost perfectly matches the description of the building in this book. It's on Google Street View. You can find it if you go to Los Angeles and you look up the intersection of Kenmore and Beverly, and then just go north, follow Kenmore north, like maybe half a block. If you look to the right, you'll see a 4-story brownstone building surrounded in covered in various trees and stuff like that. It looks very mysterious, but that's it. But yeah, the building is there. And Temple saying, I really do appreciate it when writers put in real geographical locations when they're writing in the real world. Exactly. And like I always appreciate that attention to detail, because like it's probably just it. I mean, odds are the building is just another brownstone. There's another one that looks just like it, just a couple buildings further down the street, which is also mentioned in the book. But it is like one of those buildings that just like, I wonder if there's a story behind that. Probably not, so I'll make one up. And by God, did he. So, I mean, I've spoiled the ending for you, but it's still a really cool story. It's still, the characters are a lot of fun, and I haven't really talked about all of them. Ted is a really cool character. I like Zila, even though she's probably a little too sarcastic to be believed at times. Um, Veek is a fun sort of nerdy character. Nate really he's really the center of the story, so you get a lot of his life outside of the building also, and the story itself also even though it was written like maybe when was it written? Like not that long ago. Uh, yeah, it was written in 2012, but there are elements to it that already feel dated. Uh, they're like certain things with the magazine that he works for, certain ways of communication just feel dated now, and it's only 3 years old, which just shows you like how quickly we move forward with technology. Um, yeah, so that's 14. Uh, so I do recommend checking it out. I've enjoyed it. I've read it a couple of times. Uh, Marfels is saying, "What? Well, isn't that what the show is about? Spoilers." I try not to like when it comes to book of the month discussions. I'll get into spoilers just because and especially books like this where it's really hard not to like get into a good discussion about it without getting into spoilers because I mean you'll if you read a lot of reviews, like a lot of people say like the ending is just so weird, but I'm not going to tell you what it is because you just have to experience it for yourself. Uh, and and it's very true. And like I'll admit, like a lot of those reviews are what enticed me to read the book. I'm like, okay, well, just how crazy is this ending? And my God, this ending is crazy. Uh, but I like that because then with having an ending that is so crazy, then it like really does sort of take it out of the realm of like possibly real. Like, because up to that point, like everything is weird, but like not so weird that you don't think it could happen. And then you get into the Lovecraft stuff and the squid whales, and the building was built in part by Nikola Tesla. And you're like, okay, now we're just going into crazy town. Uh, and but I like that. I like having it go just so over the top that you can just enjoy it and not be freaked out by it. And I've heard talk about them trying to make this into a movie, but I don't know if that'll ever happen. I don't think the book itself was popular enough for it to make that leap. But you never know. I love this on his wiki page. The first line is Peter Clines grew up in the Stephen King fallout zone of Cape Nettic, Maine. I love that. It's like it's not too far outside of Bangor, so they call it the Stephen King fallout zone. That's such a great line. Uh, so so yeah, so that was 14. Uh, I'd say check it out. I enjoyed it. It's a good supernatural mystery. It's a it's a fun it's fun trying to put together the pieces of the puzzle, especially and I really I'm sorry about this because I have spoiled stuff. Like it does go by it. I won't say it's not as intriguing. It's still very intriguing, but maybe not as intriguing on the same level. If you know where it's all heading, if you don't know where it's all heading, you're just like, what in God's name is going on in this story? And then when it all comes together, you're like, okay, that's insane, but it works. So, so yeah, Arabody's saying it actually sounds better than I thought. Fun hearing about it anyway. Yeah, and that was the reason that I chose it because it's a fun book with some supernatural, scary type elements to it, without just being a full straight up horror story. Because I know that there are many in our group who are very sensitive to like genuine like freak you out like hardcore horror. Um, and so I try not to make books like that, books of the month, just because I don't want to subject you to that if you're not comfortable with it. Um, so might as well get into now that we've finished this. It is the 1st of November, so we have another book of the month. And this one was actually recommended to me by one of our book clubbers, one of our members, um, a while ago, and we've been going through a lot of I would say like heavier, deeper, darker stuff, like especially with the Silmarillion this year. So I thought it would be nice to do something lighter for November. So our book for November, which was recommended to me by Ava, who isn't in the chat today. Um, the book is called Romia, the Robber's Daughter. And this is by Astrid Lindgren, who is probably better known as the author who gave us Pippi Longstocking. I actually just finished reading this last night. It's a fun, light story. It's very fantastical. Um, it's a it's a very cool story. Uh, Temple saying, but I haven't finished the never-ending story yet. Um, it's a This book has apparently been adapted into a movie and overseas, and was also adapted into an anime TV series by Hayao Miyazaki's son, which I just found out about shortly before I started the show today. Um, but this is an older book, so you might be able to find this in your library. Aravandi is asking, I wonder if my library might carry it. I think they probably will. I think this is probably one you will find in the library. Uh, but yeah, this is a lighter story. It's a quick read. Um, it's very fun. It's bright. It's got some action, some suspense to it, but overall, it's very much like a coming of age story. Uh, Marples is asking how long is Ronia? Probably like oh, let me look up the page count on Amazon. Because I got the audiobook because that's what I usually do to get through everything in time. So let's see. Doesn't give me a page count, but it's not terribly long. Um, yeah, I'm not seeing a page count on here. Let's try looking inside. No, I'm not seeing it. Oh well. But yeah, it's not a very long book. Um, yeah, the audiobook I have for it is roughly about 4 hours, which is kind of on the short side. Um, uh, and apparently, okay, Aravandi's saying it's already checked out on her library's website. Um, so yeah, hopefully you'll get a copy back. I mean, you got all of November to check it out, and we're not going to be discussing it until early December because of the Thanksgiving holiday. So we actually have a little bit more time to read this than other months. Um, So yeah, the discussion for that will be the first weekend of December, which is uh, it is December 7th. So yeah, we've actually got over a month. Um, so yeah, you can put it on hold in your library. It's a quick read. It's a fun read. I enjoyed it. Um, and thank you to Ava, who unfortunately is not with us today, for recommending this book. She actually recommended it to me like a year ago, and when I finally got around to making to getting to other book of the month choices, we ended up doing the Silmarillion for half a year. So so now we can finally get back to some more book club member suggestions. So yeah, so that'll bring us to the end. The book of the month for November is Romia, the Robber's Daughter. And next week, we'll be having an author joining us who is actually a good member, a good friend, and a good member of our local Los Angeles Tolkien community, who earlier this year put out her first book, a collection of Tolkien-based poetry called The Road Taken. And so next week we'll be joined by her, Janet Nelson Alvarez, and most likely by also by John Cockshaw, who is the illustrator. So that's what we have to look forward to next week. Um, Happy Halloween, a day late to everybody. I hope that y'all had a good one. We all had fun. Horror month is over. Back into fun fair. Uh, so I will see you all next week. And so yeah, have a good rest of the week, everybody. I will see you all next week for an author discussion, an author chat, and never stop reading.